hand. Raise your hand if you remember like one of the things that is in the Constitution dealing with slavery. Did you look back? There you go. So that's a good number of you. Gemma, what's?
Person was considered the eventually make the whole.
Correct. Listen. Every slave, for purposes of counting population in slave states, every slave will be counted as 3/5 of a person. So that doesn't mean you're chopping 40% off a person. What it means is you're counting every person, that's a slave, and then you're doing a little math equation on them. So if you had 100,000 slaves in the state of Virginia, you applied the 3/5 compromise, you'd end up with how many slaves? Do some mental math.
If I eventually in that time, would I be a slave?
No. No. Slavery was banned very early on in Mexico. And by the time Mexico actually became a country, slavery was fully outlawed. So like a lot of slaves actually, when they left on the Underground Railroad to get freedom, a lot of them went to Mexico. They went south. Okay, so mental math, everyone. What is 60% of 100,000?
40%.
I'm asking for a number, not percent.
40%.
60,000.
How do you?
It's mental math. You just think, if I have a nice round number like 100,000, it's pretty easy to figure it out, right? If I said, what's 60% of 10, what would you say? 6. So you just add more zeros, you know, it's a simple math.
Yes,
Girls.
Are you trying to process it?
Hey. Blake, go back one seat. So, there's two things about slavery in the Constitution, though. What's the second one? We have the 3/5 compromise. What's the other thing?
Not, it couldn't be touched for 20 years, approximately.
Right. So James said, 20 years, you cannot touch the slave trade. See, the southern states were super duper duper afraid of ratifying a constitution giving you the power to regulate trade to the federal government, because that's essentially what the Constitution says, right? And then immediately losing the slave trade. But the thing about it is, you know, you hear people all the time say the Constitution is this perfect document. Everything is not, it has flaws. There's no such thing as perfect. And this is probably the most imperfect part of the Constitution, arguably, to preserve the institution of slave trade. Now, you guys saw what the slave trade looks like when we watched Roots. What was the most horrifying thing that you remember about it? What was the thing that you thought was the most disturbing or violent aspect of the slave trade? Jaden?
The sheer rude, how rude they are.
Okay.
Treating them like they're nothing more than
treat them like garbage. What else?
Yeah.
When the guy said move.
Yeah. When you heard the racial slurs and the degradation of it. Okay. All right. So how did slavery get addressed in the U.S. Constitution? Give me, there's two things. What's one?
They were counted as 3/5 of a person per population before the House of Representatives.
That was very well said. So, 3/5 of all the slaves were counted towards the population of southern states. Now, just so you know, I'll get to you guys. Just relax for 1 second. Just so you know, the southern states wanted to count slaves 1 for 1. They wanted every single slave to count towards their population, which would, in the end, give them a ton of power in the House of Representatives. They didn't have to worry about the Senate. That's built in because population didn't matter, right? So the southern states had equal power of the northern states in the Senate, and they wanted to boost their power as much as possible because there was not as many people that lived in the south as in the north. But the northerners are like, you can't count slaves. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, hey, these are people, and then say, treat them like they're not people. Bottom line is this, though. The 3/5 compromise was a way to make the southern states happy and the northern states happy. It was a compromise. Like, okay, we're not going to count every slave, so here, you can count some. Now let's see how good you are at mental math real quick.
I don't know.
Raise your hand if you think you have the answer. Give you some time to think about it if you need to. If there are 100,000 slaves that live in the state of South Carolina, how many people would that actually add to their population power? 100,000, 3/5. What's the answer?
4%.
Take 100,000 divided by
I'm looking for a
5.
number, Nathan. And raise your hand, please. Looking for an actual number.
100,000 divided by times by 3,000. You have a calculator?
74,000?
What's that?
74,000?
Not exactly.
Oh, that close?
Times, no, divided by 5.
I don't know how you guys are learning math, but that's like some extra steps right there.
60,000.
60,000.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys took the long route because what I would do, I know that 3/5 is 60% just mentally. It's just so I've memorized it. Just like 1/2 is 50, 3/4 is 75. I memorized 3/5 is 60. And then I know that if I have a nice round number like 600,000, it's pretty easy to find out a nice even percentage, right? Because all I have to do is, it'd be like, what's 60% of 10? 6. 60% of 100?
60.
60. 60% of 1,000? 600. 10,000? 6,000. So you see how it's easy to mentally do that. You just, if it's all just zeros, like 100,000, it's pretty darn easy. So there you go. There's your history teacher giving you a little math tip. All right, everyone. So slavery, of course, we all know is an issue that went all through our early history, right? And it's something that I'm going to be touching on as we go through our lessons and study of history of the United States, because it's always there. And it's always an issue that needs to be wrangled with and eventually leads to a war. At the end of this class, that's where we end. We end at the war over slavery. So this is just a constant thing all throughout. So in our study of the Constitution, we know that slavery cropped its ugly head up. What did they do? How they handle it? Chad, give me something.
It can't be served.
Right, what can? What's it?
Slavery.
Not just slavery. Someone help them out. What specifically about slavery was preserved?
Slave trade.
The trade, thank you. So it was the slave trade. It was the actual obtaining of slaves in Africa, trading guns, right? Because that's what they did. Traded guns and other valuable manufactured items, but guns mainly. And they were just taking people across the ocean, and you saw what it looked like. Okay, what was like for you? Now this is going back a little bit, but I know you probably remember it. What was for you like the most disturbing part of watching the slave trade en routes?
The heads.
Like chained in there? Yes. And did anyone kind of feel chained up almost with Kunta Kinte because he felt claustrophobic just seeing it? Because I do. I feel like stuck.
You said what like made you feel what?
The most disturbing part of Roots.
Oh yeah, when that guy was raping that girl. What did he call her?
Yes.
Wait, what?
Yeah. when
Don't
he
you
would take
remember
her-
the girl who wanted to jump off the boat?
Yeah.
She was like, I'd rather die, and she tried to kill herself, but it was because the captain of the ship was sexually assaulting her over and over and over.
Yeah. I feel like the most disturbing part was when Kunta Kinte was on that pole getting whipped.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just getting destroyed.
Right.
You want to say his name.
Right.
200?
right. Your hair looks great. It's looking real good. So, David, what did you say?
I said when they chopped off their heads and put them on the ship.
Very disturbing.
Oh yeah.
Very disturbing when the ship is actually outfitted with a bulwark, fitted with pikes that are already pre-put there for that exact purpose, to display the decapitated heads of other slaves to keep people in line. So the slave trade was horrible, and we know what it looked like, and there's all different kinds of, historical accounts that back that up. That basically is kind of how it went. And it was preserved in our Constitution for 20 years. But why? Why did they have to do that?
Because the seven years.
Right. So if you look at our federal constitution, federalism, the sharing power between states and the federal government has a right to regulate trade. okay? And of course, the slave trade is just trade. And the southern states were afraid that as soon as they had the Constitution ratified, that the slave trade would instantly get, you know, banned and sort of ruin their way of life. That was their thinking. So there it is, it's in the Constitution, 20 years, slave trade.